The following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The opinions voiced in this podcast are our own. We are not experts on the topic we present, but have conducted our own research. Listener discretion is advised. During the late 1960s into the 1970s, farmers in Canada began noticing strange rings and circles showing up in their fields overnight. Nobody was quite sure what they were, and with the UFO surge in the late 1970s, the idea arose that they were made by aliens. People would travel from all corners of the world just to catch a glimpse of these alien-made crop circles. Not everybody held this sentiment. However, a different reason was not able to be found. Nobody knew for certain what was causing them. Were these crop circles the result of UFOs landing? Or was there some other worldly explanation for these bizarre events? This is the Strange and Undecided podcast. Welcome back to the Strange and Undecided podcast. I'm your host, Jarrett, joined by my co-host.
I am Patrick.
Welcome back, everyone.
Hi, how is everyone?
So this week we have a little bit more of a lighthearted episode compared to last week's episode.
This is a fun one. No murders, no disappearances, no crimes.
Correct. So we're looking at the topic of crop circles in Canada. Are you familiar with crop circles in particular? I feel like most people are, but...
Yeah, I remember growing up and seeing a lot about it, but recently I haven't really seen like any new crop circles forming around. But I remember watching on TV, it was like a big, cool little mystery thing. Like, what are these things? I was always really interested in them.
Basically the same thing for me growing up. It was just one of those things that you saw every once in a while and it just kind of grabbed your imagination. Oh, what could that be? What is that? All right, so just some housekeeping items right off the bat. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us on your favorite podcasting platform and give us a rating. It really helps. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and comment so we can see what you enjoyed about the episode. In terms of new episodes, the next episode coming out will be our Halloween special. So that will be released sometime around Halloween. And then after that, that'll conclude season 1 of Strange and Undecided. New episodes will be released in January of 2025 in the new year. So keep your eye out for that if you are interested in the show. And thank you for everyone who has been listening. And with that being said, let's begin our topic tonight. Most of us have seen pictures or at least heard of crop circles. In case you aren't sure what they are, crop circles are the almost perfectly circular patterns found in the middle of fields of grain or other crops that show up mysteriously. Many people tend to associate them with UFOs. The Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix movie Signs from 2002 depicts them as caused by aliens, but in real life we aren't quite sure who or what causes them. They are interesting in the fact that in the crops where the circles are found, the stalks of the plant are completely flattened into sometimes simple shapes and can vary greatly, sometimes producing incredibly complex geometrical patterns. For such a strange phenomenon, these crop circles aren't isolated to a single place. They are found worldwide. However, the highest number are found in Great Britain, where around 90% were found in a place called Milk Hill in Wiltshire, and they began appearing in the 1970s. While the largest quantity of these circles may come from Great Britain, it wasn't the first place. Earlier reports of these crop circles came out from other places around the world, such as the United States in the 1950s, and most significantly, Australia and Canada during the 1960s. At the time, they were referred to as saucer nests, implying that UFOs had made the impression in the field where they landed.
That's kind of cute. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, saucer nests were very specific. It was, that impression in the field, saucer nest caused by a UFO, period. End of story.
Well, it makes it more relatable to things that we understand. Bird nest, saucer nest.
Yeah. As time progressed, reports of these saucer nests steadily increased, and by the 1980s, the number had risen exponentially. By this time, people began to theorize that there might be other explanations for the patterns in the field instead of UFOs, and began calling the phenomenon crop circles. So during the 1970s and 1980s, a lot of attention was being brought to crop circles, and the public was very interested in what was going on. So-called experts on crop circles began to pop up calling themselves cerealogists. The name is derived from Ceres, the goddess of agriculture and grain crops. These cerealogists claim to know exactly what crop circles were and what makes them authentic.
Whenever you have to give yourself a title, I feel like it takes the legitimacy out of it. Like if I give you the title of cerealogist, like, okay, own it. But if you go around saying, I'm a cerealogist, blah, 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 I made this up, blah, 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 I'm an expert.
I feel it's quite pretentious to call yourself that. Like, oh, we're naming ourselves after the goddess of agriculture and grain.
Yeah, no doubt. That too.
So many theories were proposed, such as crop circles were created by UFOs, while others claimed they were created by natural causes, such as geological or weather events. Despite these various claims, none of them have been definitively proven. This is evident from the next two cases we are going to touch on. These cases are among the more prominent and well-known crop circle events in Canada, where the police got involved and even the military. Our first case takes us to a place called Duhamel, Alberta, which is a small hamlet near Camrose, Alberta. On August 5th, 1967, circular rings had appeared in a farmer's field overnight. Like I stated before, the 1970s into the 1980s was a time when crop circles really became common public knowledge. In 1967, especially in rural Alberta, they were not well known of or even heard of. However, in the weeks leading up to the crop rings, quote, Duhamel was plagued with strange occurrences. Reports of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, had made it into the local papers weeks before the crop circles were discovered, end quote. So I find that very interesting in this particular event. So it wasn't just these crop circles popped up out of nowhere. It was a bunch of reports of people seeing strange things like UFOs. And then the culmination of that was the crop circles, essentially.
Okay. We don't know very many details yet, but let's keep an open mind. There's still a possibility of like somebody seeing these UFOs and then going out and making these circles themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
So correlation does not equal causality, but let's hear the rest of the facts.
The owner of the farm where the crop rings were discovered was named Mr. Schilke, I apologize if I'm saying that name wrong, who stumbled upon them by accident. He had gone out into his field to collect his cows after the heavy rainfall the night before, as they had not come back from the pasture. It was not a common occurrence for him to have to do this, and when he went out into the field after weeks of not being there, he came across the rings. In total, he found 4 distinct crop rings. Mr. Schilke stated that there was no possible way the marks were made by his own farming equipment. When asked what he thought it was, he stated he was unsure, but he didn't believe in UFOs.
Okay, this is just a circle. It's not like an intricate artistic pattern or anything like that.
No.
Okay, but still an odd thing to discover in your field.
The local press was notified of the event, who promptly descended on the farm, followed by a media circus. It had gained so much attention that a scientist, Dr. Jones, who was working with a nearby military facility called the Defense Research Establishment Suffield, or DRES, was even called to investigate the crop circles. From an official report on the incident, quote, on August 8, 1967, a Mr. K. Patridge of Camrose, Alberta, reported the finding of a number of circular impressions in a pasture in the vicinity of the town of Camrose, Alberta. An investigation was conducted by an officer from Canadian Forces Base Edmonton in the company of Dr. G.H. Jones of the Defense Research Board Experimental Station in Suffield, end quote. By the time Dr. Jones had arrived, the field had been largely trampled, and there were clear signs that vehicles had even driven into the field. Despite this, the rings were still visible. His observations were as follows. The rings were approximately 9 meters or 30 feet in diameter, and the impression they made in the ground was 5 to 7 inches wide. However, the marks varied slightly in size. Oddly enough, the circles were not complete. At most, they were 3/4 finished. There were no exhaust blasts from machinery or scorch marks that were found on the crops or even in the soil inside the rings. There was definitely something that had to have made the impressions in the ground, and it had to be something that had considerable force or weight. Some may immediately think that the impressions are made from a truck tire, but Dr. Jones indicated, quote, "The most striking feature of the circular marks, other than the close circularity, was that they were quite distinct from the car and truck tire marks made during the week since the discovery. The marks were, in general, very uniform in width and far more sharply impressed in the ground. They stood out in quite sharp contrast to the vehicle tracks in immediate proximity to them. Despite the similarity of the circular marks to the pattern of a tire track, the 4 circles were strikingly different from truck tracks." End quote. Upon completion of the investigation, an official report was published in the form of a 5-page document, which I will be posting in the show notes for those of you who are interested in reading it. The quotes I have been reading are from that report. In summary, Dr. Jones was not able to confirm nor deny a hoax took place, but he did say that if a wheel had made the impression in the ground, it would have had to come from a truck weighing 100 to 200 tons. A truck that size would not have been able to go out into the middle of the field and make impressions in 4 distinct spots and then leave without disturbing the rest of the field and going unnoticed. Dr. Jones indicated that it was likely an aircraft or spacecraft weighing 135 tons that could have made the rings.
I find it interesting how this case got so much coverage. Just looking at the circles, they're just circles.
Yeah.
They're not like the crazy like crop circles you think of typically when you think of crop circles.
Yeah, this was more on the very vanilla side of a crop circle. It's very basic.
I feel like Canada's like trying to get part of the action. Like, hey, we got circles too. Come look at these. And it's just like just a 3/4 of a circle. I mean, interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I think also because it's 1967 and crop circles weren't really reported at that point in time. So this is like in its infancy. These were the first actual reports of crop circles. And then eventually 10, 15 years later, they became what we know them as the super intricate, detailed art forms in fields.
So this could be like a ground zero of like the first crop circle and they're evolving.
Yeah, at least in Canada. Yeah.
This is like a preschool crop circle.
It's not very impressive. However, how it got there, that's the big thing with this case.
Yeah, if it was your field and you found these circles out of nowhere, I'd be kind of concerned. Do you know if they took like any soil samples or anything of that nature? Anything like scientific?
From what I saw in my research, when they did test the soil, they found absolutely nothing. It wasn't irradiated. It wasn't abnormal compared to their surrounding soil. There was nothing different.
Mm-hmm. Did they test the plant matter around the area?
I didn't see anything about that specifically, but I think they just did a visual inspection and they found that there was no physical damage to the crops other than it being flattened in a unidirectional manner.
Yep, looks weird. We don't know.
Pretty much very basic testing. At the end of the day, this case was determined to be unsolved by Canada's Department of National Defence, and nothing more has come from this case. Our second notable case happened on September 1st, 1974. 36-year-old Edwin Furr, a farmer from Langenburg, Saskatchewan, was busy harvesting his crops around 10:30 in the morning. He happened to look up from what he was doing as he knew a rough patch of land was ahead and didn't want to damage his swather. A swather is a tractor with a cylindrical apparatus on the front that cuts the crops. So when I was young, I used to call them combines, but again, I'm not a farmer by any stretch, but I guess they're called swathers.
I've never heard that term. I've always called them combines.
As he looked up, he witnessed something very odd. A large object, approximately 30 feet wide, stood ahead of him. Initially thinking it to be a hunting blind left behind as a joke, he moved towards it to have a better look. However, it wasn't a hunting blind at all. It was an object he had never seen before, and it was hovering about a foot off the ground and turning in a clockwise direction. He observed the surface of the object and determined it to have a rough texture, and it looked like brushed steel. He didn't have a chance to touch it, though. Instead, he backed away slowly to his swather, never taking his eyes off the object. He tried to fire up his swather, but it wouldn't start. so he just sat and watched as if he were in a hypnotic trance. As if one strange object wasn't enough, Edwin looked around and noticed 4 other objects also hovering nearby. They were all turning in the same clockwise direction as if they were in sync. Feeling completely overwhelmed by what he was witnessing, Edwin stated he felt frozen and just continued to watch in amazement. He noticed from one of the objects something coming out of it and striking the ground repeatedly, a probe maybe. He watched them for another 15 minutes, and all of a sudden, they rose up slowly, and with a blast of air, they flew away, leaving behind a gray vapor trail. 5 circles of flattened crop were also left behind by the objects. No burning was observed or any physical damage, just simply flattened.
You have a picture of these ones? Can you tell from the photo, are they going clockwise like the UFOs were spinning? Sometimes you can tell the direction of the grain falling.
The grain was in a unidirectional way. It wasn't like blasted off in different directions. But I don't know if it was going the same direction that the UFO was going. They didn't specify. An hour later, Edwin returned to his family, and they could tell something wasn't right. They urged him to tell them, and when he did, they thought he was just crazy and had to go see for themselves.
See, that's why he's like, that's why I didn't tell you guys. You're going to judge me.
Yeah,
See?
exactly. As Edwin's brother put it, seeing is believing. Sure enough, the crop circles were right where he said they would be. The following morning, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, were contacted and came out to investigate the field. Puzzled by what they were observing, the police took many photos of the crop circles. They also believed Edwin to be telling the truth and that he wasn't responsible for this or was trying to pull off a hoax. In a final report, the police wrote that, quote, "The witness Fur has been known by a member of this detachment for a period of 4 years. He is a responsible person and his information is considered reliable," end quote. The RCMP concluded the investigation and stated, quote, "There were 5 different distinct circles caused by something exerting what had to be heavy air or exhaust pressure over the high grass," end quote. Naturally, the RCMP told Edwin to keep this hush-hush, but word spreads quickly in small towns. Soon there were hundreds of people flocking to the area just to see these crop circles. They completely trampled Edwin's crops in the process. To prevent people from coming onto their property, the Fur family set fire to their fields as a deterrent, but the circles were still visible.
Well, I mean, there goes your entire crop, not just the part that was been trampled.
A huge portion of it was trampled, so they would rather lose that portion of the crop that they burned than keep having people come on their property all the time and invade their privacy. And
I mean, clearly didn't work if the circles remained.
yeah, I don't think they were expecting them to still be there. The National Research Council of Canada, or NRC, conducted an investigation into the matter. Or rather, they made a conclusion about the incident without actually performing an investigation. Not once did they show up to the location to even look. They simply concluded that the crop circles were nothing more than fairy rings, which are naturally occurring rings of fungi. Fairy rings usually take a considerable amount of time to grow. They don't just appear overnight. Nonetheless, this was their conclusion.
Speaking of fairy rings, I have seen one in my parents' front yard.
Yeah, I think I've seen the same thing too. When I was younger, I lived on a cul-de-sac, and in the middle of the road, there was kind of like a green space, if you will. And I think fairy rings popped up there frequently in the same spot, which was kind of weird. As days progressed, more circles started popping up over Langenberg and the surrounding towns. Gradually, as the weeks passed, these circle reports decreased and the sightings reported diminished as well. This case was so notable that once again, Canada celebrated this event by having the Royal Canadian Mint make a new commemorative coin this year, which at the time of recording is 2024. The coin depicts Edwin sitting on his swather, watching the 5 objects hovering in front of him. You can even order the coin right now from mint.ca for $139.95 Canadian.
Does the coin have a value, like written on the coin, or is it just not meant to be used as currency?
Yeah, pretty much. On the back of it, it says that it's valued at $20 Canadian. even though you're paying $140 for it, but it's definitely not meant to be used as currency.
So if I go to like a Walmart and I give him this $20 on a coin, would they take it?
No.
It's got a bunch of UFOs on it.
No.
What the heck would they think? Joke's on them. They just didn't take my $140.
Ultimately, no answer was ever given as to the cause. The people who witnessed these crop circles were stunned by the mystery, as well as everyone who read about it in the newspaper, watched it on the news, or listened to it on the radio. Despite no answers, the case lives on as an unsolved mystery to this day. All right, so now we're going to branch into some theories as to what these crop circles are or where they're coming from. From what I saw in my research, crop circles are typically considered to be nothing more than a hoax. And that is thanks to two guys. In 1991, both Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, friends who lived near Winchester, England, made news headlines claiming that they began the crop circle phenomenon back in 1978. But how? Something of this magnitude surely would have required an elaborate plan and tons of equipment, right? Wrong. They indicated that all they used was a plank of wood, rope, and a baseball cap fitted with a loop of wire to assist them in walking in a straight line. They made some crop circles, and for the first while, nobody even noticed. They had to make multiple attempts over multiple years at making these circles before people began to notice.
I apologize at the start of the podcast. I did mention there was going to be no crimes. I believe this is vandalism.
Yeah. To prove that they could create these crop circles, they performed the task in front of a number of journalists. They then had a Syriologist named Pat Delgado to examine the circle and determine if it was real. He deemed it authentic, and it was later revealed to him that it was man-made.
There's your problem. What did I say about the Syriologists?
Exactly. So that kind of disproved his credibility right then and there. When asked by Time magazine in 1991 why they made the crop circles, Chorley told them that he and Bauer were in a pub in 1978 and they were, quote, wondering what they could do for a bit of a laugh. Their inspiration to make crop circles came from the Australian crop circle cases in 1966 and from the testimony of a retired Air Force officer involved in the 1947 Roswell, New Mexico incident, claiming that something not of this earth had fallen from the sky and crashed into the desert. Bauer and Chorley went so far as to claim sole responsibility for all crop circles made prior to 1987 in southern England, and also for over 200 crop circles spanning 1978 to 1991.
I mean, I guess that explains why there's an abundance in England.
Absolutely. However, there were still over 1,000 crop circles that they didn't claim to be responsible for. This had to have been the perfect time for them to do this, as in the late 1970s, like I mentioned before, the UFO craze had caught the public's attention. It was so influential that it became a worldwide phenomenon and inspired people to make their own crop circles. In the following years, and even to this day, crop circle art keeps popping up all over the world. Crop circles have since become an art form as well as a tourist attraction in many places. There's been a shift from an association with UFO and aliens. However, there are still those who strongly believe that they are still responsible for some of the crop circles out there. Bauer and Chorley demonstrated that essentially anybody can make a crop circle. You don't have to be talented.
When you say people are doing this for art, are they still illegally going into people's fields and doing this? Or is like some farmer coming and saying, hey, you can use my crop, make this cool art piece and it'll attract visitors?
I can't say for certain that everybody's asking for permission to do this.
Would you be considered a respected artist if your specialty was crop circles?
I mean, if it looked good. In total, 80% of the world's crop circles are explained away as nothing more than a hoax. But what about the other 20%? What made those? This leads us into our next theory, which is UFOs. And this all started back in 1947. To understand if crop circles were made by UFOs, we need to understand UFO sightings and how they were treated in Canada. On June 24th, a pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported 9 shiny flying objects going over Mount Rainier in Washington state. Canada's first ever UFO sightings after World War II occurred in the same year. Due to the Cold War, which was beginning with Soviet Russia, the Canadian government had concerns that UFOs might actually be advanced Soviet technology instead of little green men in a spacecraft. 2 projects were launched in the 1950s centered around UFOs. From 1950 to 1954, Project Magnet was created by a radio engineer working for the Department of Transportation named Wilbert Smith. He conducted experiments to determine how UFOs flew and specifically looked into magnetic energy. If you remember the Granger-Taylor case, he was also interested in how UFOs flew and believed it to be through magnetic energy. If you haven't heard of Granger-Taylor, the spaceman of BC, it's a very interesting story of a man who was passionate about UFO technology and disappeared without a trace. If you're interested in his case, then you can listen to episode 21 to find out more. Back to Project Magnet, Wilbert Smith also wanted to test eyewitness accounts, so he launched a balloon into the night sky to see what exactly people reported and how accurate they were in their reports. Wilbert also built a UFO observatory at Shirley's Bay, which is a restricted military area near Ottawa. Unfortunately, the tests that he conducted were inconclusive. He believed that the UFOs that people were seeing were from outer space, and with that, people shunned him and Project Magnet was discontinued.
How exactly was he testing?
So the test with the balloon, he wanted to see the public's reports of when he launched this balloon into the air.
Oh, I see.
He wanted to see how accurate they were in saying like, oh my God, I saw this UFO flying around and it was shooting lasers everywhere. No, it was a balloon and he knew exactly what it was.
Okay, I see that's a pretty good control.
2 years after Project Magnet had started, the government also began Project Second Story, which lasted from 1952 to 1954. The head of the project was a man named Peter Millman, who was an astronomer skeptical about UFOs. He held a pessimistic view that UFOs had nothing to do with science and that the project was nothing more than a waste of time and money. No actual investigations with this committee took place. They acted more of as an advisory board that looked to standardize a form for UFO sightings. They also tried to debunk any UFO sightings that had happened and claimed they were nothing more than weather phenomenon or meteorites descending towards Earth. The conclusion the project came up with was that UFOs were, quote, not amendable to scientific inquiry, end quote. After studying UFOs for a while, the military determined that the Soviet Union was not responsible for the objects. This is important as before this, UFOs were being treated as a security risk. Now they're being treated as something unknown entirely. Over the years, RCMP detachments all over Canada were responsible for collecting UFO reports and sending them to the government officials for full analysis. There was a lot of reluctance from scientists tasked with investigating the claims, and many of the reports were put on the back burner and then forgotten about entirely. The cases that couldn't be explained away and caught media attention, like the 2 cases I mentioned earlier, were harder to ignore. However, it seems the government just tried to sweep them under the rug and ignore the possibility that these might actually be extraterrestrial. Since the late 1970s and through the 1980s, crop circles have been a core topic of research for different groups rooted in the paranormal, ufological, and anomalistic areas. The theories by them range greatly, however, they still center around the idea that these crop circles are caused by something we can't fully comprehend or explain. To date, there has been no official definitive evidence that UFOs from outer space caused the crop circles, but at the same time, there has been no explanation given. Many crop circle cases remain unsolved. Our final theory is that crop circles are caused by nature or some other scientific explanation. Initially, theorists came up with the idea that random wind vortexes or mini tornadoes cause crop circles. The problem with that is that over time, the crop circle patterns, which began as a simple ring of flattened crop and circles, evolved to more intricate and elaborate patterns, causing this theory to alter. The theory was adjusted to account for the changes in crop circle patterns and began to include electrical forces and multiple mini tornadoes that cause the circles. This eventually formed the theory of ball lightning, which is a rare and unexplained phenomena where essentially an orb of lightning that moves around for a small period of time bursts, causing the patterns in the field. The orb can contain luminous gases and microwave radiation and has the potential to create very complex patterns when it comes into contact with vegetation. Researchers in Russia determined that when a normal lightning bolt strikes crops, it can cause the plant stems to bend in very intricate ways and even bend in clockwise circles. Another idea was that underground water can cause, quote, a dynamo creating an electrostatic field that causes the plants to collapse. If you remember before, the NRC concluded that fairy rings or fungi rings were responsible for crop circles, which once again, there has been no evidence to support that. There have been a number of other scientific theories proposed, but none of them have been witnessed or reproduced to the same level as any crop circle case. Somewhat silencing the matter was late physicist Stephen Hawking, who commented on the matter saying, quote, corn circles are either hoaxes or formed by vortex movement of air, end quote. Regardless of the reason, crop circles have become a wonder of the world. They have captivated people's imaginations for nearly 60 years and continue to do so. It adds to the mystery that there is no conclusion to this story and that these kinds of incidents remain unsolved. Maybe one day we will find the answer, but for now, I will let you decide what you think crop circles are. Out of the theories that I presented to you, which one do you think is the most plausible? Hoax, science, or UFOs?
I think it depends on the formation and the pattern specifically. I think we'd have to look at each individual case and judge it based off of that. I don't think I could give a generalized statement to crop circles in general.
Even with the two guys admitting that they went out into fields and made these circles for 10 plus years, and that most of the circles that were found in southern England were because of them, not because of some kind of phenomenon. Like, that doesn't sway your decision at all?
Well, I was listening to a podcast, Theories of Everything with Kurt Jaimungal. So I'm getting these facts based off of journalist Linda Moulton Howe. She is pretty prominent in these types of cases, UFOs and crop circles and stuff like that. And she was talking about how you could go into some of these formations and the way that the crops are like folded over each other. So it's like folded like a lattice structure. She said it was like 12 inches deep with like multiple layers of, say, like the bottom layer is going this way. The layer on top of that is going perpendicular to that. The layer on top of that is going another direction. So all these crops are folded over each other in such intricate ways that couldn't be done with like the two guys with the wooden plank just stepping on them, because they would all be going in the same direction. And also that they're not like, the stems aren't like broken, like they're not crunched, like they're perfectly like molded almost.
Yeah, that's what in these cases people noticed, was that there was no physical crunching, breaking. It was just simply bent in a certain direction. Like, there was no physical damage, no scorch marks, no cuts or anything like that, which I found really interesting, because if you had a plank of wood and you were jumping around a field, you'd think you'd see at least some form of breakage or indentation in the stem from the wood plank being stomped on to get those crops to go completely flat.
So the cases where it was verified as a hoax, what was the stem breakage like? Was it folded or was it?
They were able to do it in a way that didn't damage the crops entirely. So I don't know. If they can do it, two guys with a plank of wood and rope, I think other people could probably find ways to bend these fields, bend these crops in a way where they don't actually truly damage the plants.
Yeah, for sure, many of these are confirmed as hoaxes, but I don't think all of them can be hoaxes.
I think something happened at some point in time that we're not sure what it is. I'm not saying it's alien specifically or some kind of geological anomaly or weather anomaly, but something happened that nobody knows about and people just kind of ran with that.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Like, how else would you come up with an idea like this? Unless you were a legit artist and you're just super creative and wanted to destroy some poor farmer's field. But I feel like they probably would have gotten inspiration from some type of either natural or paranormal event causing these things.
I bet there's at least one person out there that saw that and goes, that's cool. I'm inspired by that. I want to go do that.
Yeah, I mean, good on them if that's the case for that one person.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a legitimate form of art and you're passionate about it, that's great. If you're trying to like hoax somebody, that's kind of not really cool.
Well, that's Bauer and Chorley. They were just like sitting in, like they said, in the pub, looking for something to do that would be funny. Like they were trying to hoax people and be like, wouldn't this be so hilarious if we just went out and messed with this many people?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple times, yeah, it's a good laugh. But if you keep it up for claiming to do these for like 1,000 times or whatever they say, it's kind of a shitty person. Their motivation was to eventually tell the media, hey, this was us all along. Give us the glory.
Maybe because they haven't been found out for that long, they eventually are like, okay, we have to tell somebody because we want our 15 minutes of fame.
We're 40 now. We don't want to do this anymore.
Who knows? They might also be super nice dudes. Who knows? I've never met them. I don't know anything about them just from what I've read.
So anyway, the other interesting thing Linda talks about when she went to investigate one of these crop circles specifically, she said she would like enter the circle, like the perimeter of where it starts. And she said it felt like she was entering a warm jello, almost like there was some type of for the lack of a better term, force field.
Kind of like an electrical wall almost.
Yeah, something like that. She said warm jello. It felt like something was like an active resistance you were walking into.
That's interesting because some of the cases that I did read about that I didn't discuss in here per se talked about them taking soil samples, because you asked about that one case earlier, if they took soil samples and there was nothing. In other cases, they found inside the circles, when they took the soil samples, they found radiation. So maybe this warm jello feeling, maybe she was stepping into radiation maybe, or maybe it was just like the energy that was left behind and she was kind of experiencing something like that anyways. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, wavelengths of radiation you don't feel specifically, but some different form of energy, yeah, you might be able to feel. I don't know, whatever it could be. So here's a quote from Linda. She says that, quote, "It's a mathematical language that's being used to test time travel," end quote.
Interesting.
And then Kurt mentions that it could be an artifact of a calibration technique.
What does he mean by that?
Well, what that made me think of is, it's a funny name. Do you know what a fiducial is?
No, I've never heard that term before.
A fiducial is used in like optics as like a calibration pattern. So think of like a QR code. You know how it's just like a weird random pattern, which kind of could resemble what a crop circle is. But anyway, like a fiducial, say you were a robot trying to center yourself in a room.
Right.
So you would need to put a camera on that robot arm per se, and then put some little artifacts around the room that camera can read to orient itself. So you would put like a fiducial pattern, like in this corner of a wall or in this corner, and the camera reads that QR code essentially and knows where it is in spatial relation to the room. So what Linda's kind of getting at is, what if these are kind of like a calibration pattern, like a fiducial would be, but that they're testing time travel?
I wouldn't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah, interesting theory. Like I've never heard of that.
But I think at the end of the day, most of the crop circle cases are most likely hoaxes or people just making their own art. But there still is a percentage where it's up in the air.
We've never seen any solid evidence. I'm talking like video footage. Here's a UFO hovering over this field and it left a crop circle. We've never seen anything like that as far as I know.
Nope.
That would be like the best evidence possible. But for now, like it's totally anecdotal.
And I think we'll leave it at that. All right, that's going to end the show for tonight. If you have any ideas or want your story featured on the show, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.
And good night.